Hey everybody, this is Perch. Let's talk about the generational crisis in comics. It says it's an email. I just running to saying things. It says, "Hey Perch, does comics have a generational crisis going on outside of just the whole digital versus physical debate? When I look at the people in comics who are considered to be the young creators, we're talking about people close to 40. Maybe they're about 36 when we hear about them. Some of the 80s and 90s Marvel legends got their start as teenagers. Shooter comes to mind. I think Liefeld and McFarlane too. Most of them. It's one of the things that's really striking, by the way, is that you look at Wizard in the 90s and you look at like their little photos of creators, and by and large, particularly the artists, but a lot of the writers too, they're just like kids. Like they're literally like in their early 20s. Many of them. It's nuts. Anyway. Back to the mail. It says, as much as I share your love of the older creators like Simonson, Byrne, Ascenti, and I want to see them all get more work, I can't help but notice the absolute deficit and failure of the big two, particularly to identify younger talent, whether writing or art, but especially writing since they seem so obsessed with kids. How do you like our non-binary Flash, fellow kids? Routine from 43-year-old writers. Nothing wrong with older writers, but this odd idea that they're somehow going to connect with Zoomers by basically putting TikTok trends into stories is stupid. Zoomers aren't really asking for that unless you honestly believe that Gail Simone's 140,000 Superman is gay and so I'm here for it followers all buy comics. They do not. But I also want to point out that when you're young, I would argue is when you're most creatively edgy, risky, and experimental. The older you get, the more you mellow into your, I'm going to write this great American novel phase, and for comics, that can get tedious. I'd argue that there's something else here, too. I do think that, younger writers, younger creators do tend to be more experimental. That's one of the things that's been, rich for comics is when you do get kind of experimental work, that's where a lot of magic comes out. If you look at kind of some of the British invasion with people like Miller and Moore and Morrison, you have, people who started, at an early age doing very experimental stuff. And it's really what caught the attention, the hearts, and the minds, the imagination of a lot of people. The older creators, I mean, some of them mellow out, but I see more what happens is not a mellowing out, but instead kind of an odd, kind of bitter desire to just want to screw with their fan base. It's almost like, what I would describe it this way, that there's a number of creators who hit their late 30s, early 40s, and they come to the conclusion that they're not going to be Todd McFarlane or Alan Moore, and they're not going to have this breakout success. And you're working for Marvel doing Son of Carnage or, limited series. And you just kind of in your mind say, fuck, this isn't what I wanted my career to look like, but here I am. And so I just don't, it's not that I just don't care anymore. It's that, I just, why am I doing this? I don't know. And so you kind of get into this mode where you're resentful to the company you're working for. You're resentful to the fans. You try and find ways to tweak them. I mean, look, it is, I would say it was wholeheartedly sad and pathetic that so many people lost their shit with the Donald Trump looking MODOK in a Spider-Gwen annual. The people who did endless comments on that. I mean, I ultimately did a video on that just showing people what the hell it was, because it was being portrayed by some as Marvel has unveiled their new master villain, Donald Trump. But it was like, no, it was a big character gag in a Spider-Gwen annual. Like it was irrelevant, and it was. And so I think the reaction by the fans was, overblown and stupid. However, at the same time, the thought process of a creator to say, this is what I want to do with my time is also dumb. Like, can you imagine getting a job in comics and then you're working for Marvel and you decide the thing I want to do is insert a Donald Trump MODOK into a like that doesn't scream I'm winning. And I think that comes from the creative mind of somebody who is like, I thought I would be, Kirkman, and instead I'm doing a backup story in a Spider-Gwen annual. So screw it. I'm going to put in Trump here and entertain myself because my life generally sucks. And if you look at a lot of the tweets, by the way, of a lot of creators, they often fall, the middling successful ones or the unsuccessful ones, they fall into that same category of just the person seems pissed at life. Like, this isn't what they wanted to do. This isn't who they wanted to be, but here they are. And I think that's what happens when a lot of people get older. Anyway, let's finish with this mail. It says, here's my question. Okay. Perch is assigned top dog of Marvel Comics tomorrow, and you're asked to go out and find a dozen younger writers and artists to shape them into the next generation of comic book creators. Where do you look? Webtoons. What does that process look like? Looks like going and seeing who's got a lot of hits off Webtoons and potentially drawing from them, provided they're in the genre that I'm hiring for. Meaning, I wouldn't go to Webtoons, find somebody who is got a huge audience base in a romance online comic, and then put them on Spider-Man. That would be stupid. But I would look for some of that talent. I'll be honest. I would also go and frankly raid Japan and Korea. I think you're telling me it's something like My Hero Academia doesn't translate to American superhero comics. Get out of here. I would absolutely try doing stuff like that. Anyway, I'll give a more detailed answer in a minute, but let me finish off this mail. It says, like I said, I love the older guys, but we seem to be at a point where we lose a few legends every year, and Marvel won't always have the here's a mini-series by Peter David well to keep going back to, unfortunately. And yes, the big two have clearly neglected and wasted these older creators over the last decade. Hope this mail doesn't come off as dismissive older creators. Not my intention. Okay. It didn't. No worries. I get the point. That you do need to generate that next generation of talent. And, but I'm not convinced that the next generation of talent, by the way, is critical to get the next generation of readers. I think the next generation of talent is critical to just have good talent coming in the door and, not have to rely on, basically older creators and people who are clearly not ready for prime time. I think, the other thing is publishers have to stop pushing creators who are, not particularly great at driving a lot of commercial success for books, are not coming up with really kind of engaging ideas that are kind of, exciting the readership, but they're easy to work with, or they just like them personally. So they're going to give them a bunch of work, not speaking about anyone in particular, Colin Lanzig, but I'm saying there are people out there in these companies who are, they're editors' favorites because they're just nice to work with. But, from a commercial success standpoint, it's not it. I think there's a fairly major problem there. With just finding, good new talent. And maybe it's young is the wrong way to put it. Maybe it's just new. You need to find good new talent. And that's just not in the cards in a lot of cases. I do think it's a major, major problem. So, like I said, where do you go? I said Webtoon very quickly. I think that's somewhat of a cheeky answer. I think there's better answers than that. I think that, look, what's funny is some of the talent search and people looking for new creators, it hasn't been wrong. They've gone and looked at YA fantasy. They've looked at kind of a bunch of these different sources, including online comics. And that's where they've gotten some of these people. And that's not necessarily a bad idea, but maybe it's not the first step that is wrong. It's the second and third step that generally is wrong. Because what they often do is they take these writers and they're like, well, let's give them a little mini series or an anthology story of some completely irrelevant character that nobody cares about, that really has no continuity to speak of, and let's see how it goes. And invariably nobody cares, but there is no great kind of fan reaction. There's no ability to kind of craft a larger story when you're hiring somebody brand new to write a 3-page anthology story. I mean, you're not really getting anything. So what often gets tested with these new writers is, can they follow a script? Can they, work with an editor? Can we get them through the Marvel payroll process, etc.? As opposed to, can I tell a compelling long-form story that's going to spread out over issues? The wrong things get tested. What I would do is utilize kind of more publicly what Dan Slott does, privately, is I would take a Louise Simonson, who, yes, is an older creator, and I would pair Louise Simonson with 2 or 3 understudies, and I would have them co-write. I would start with, maybe Simonson does the larger, outline of the plot, and then have some of these younger writers, do the scripting and kind of fill in some of the gaps. And I would basically give somebody, I would give a lot of these new creators, new writers in particular, a year of working as an understudy to some of these legends who, probably would be more than happy to do the high level plotting and not the detailed story, and to give that work to a younger creator. And I think you get a chance to have somebody learn the ropes and what it's like to work at a comic company, but also train them on what it's like to tell a long form story. That's what I would do. So, I mean, I would get some of these people like they have been who are kind of young, up and coming talent, but I would pair them with, established legend talent in the hopes that you're creating and generating a stable of really great people. That's what I would do. Artists are easier, I think. With artists, you can use a number of approaches, but that's what I would do. So what about you? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.